I'm gonna put my mic hat back on.
People can't get enough crimping. Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams, editor-in-chief of Hackaday.
And I'm Kristina Panos, assignments editor at Hackaday.
This is episode 163. This week we'll be talking movie sound, defeating Dymo DRM, a 3D printed guitar neck, and Biometrics Bereft of Big Brother. In the news this week, we have something that is near and dear to the hearts of anyone who's interested in right to repair stuff, and that is that Samsung is going to be selling genuine parts and tools to customers to repair its Galaxy S20 and S21 smartphones and tablets and stuff. What's interesting, I thought about this, is that they're partnering with iFixit on this, and this is kind of, in my mind, giving iFixit, who's been kind of a community-driven and stalwart of right to repair stuff, a little bit of a platform. And I just think that's great that they are getting a little limelight out of this whole thing as well.
Oh, me too. It's quite the boost for them.
Yeah, what's funny about this is that Apple announced this last fall that they were going to also start making some of their spare parts to repair their phones available. I don't know, the cynic in me says that they are probably being forced to do this by the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC in the States, which said basically last fall said that they were going to start cracking down on firms that through restricting spare parts were exercising illegal monopoly pressure. So I don't know. I'm certain that Apple and Samsung will try to paint themselves as stalwarts of the burgeoning right to repair movement. But at the same time, you know, just because they did have their arms twisted, it doesn't mean they're not doing it. So I guess that's a good thing.
Well put.
I mean, so I don't want to bag on them too hard. On the other hand, when we were talking about this last night, actually, Tom Nardi was like, yeah, but you can't open the phones anyway without, you know, putting it in an autoclave and somehow softening up the glue to get it out. But if you look back a couple weeks to that article that Lewin wrote about the European Union's battery recycling directive, it looks like there's pressure on that side coming out of Europe to make phone batteries more recyclable. And that means you have to be able to open the thing and get the battery out. And if you couple that with pressure coming from the US government, the FTC, that they have to sell spare parts, this is starting to look good for those of us who are interested in fixing our stuff.
I didn't realize that France requires phone makers to offer spare parts for at least 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And to disclose reparability scores to consumers.
Oh, that's interesting. Then they're doing that already. That's just something extra over and above that France is doing, because I live in Germany and we don't have any rules like that. So the French must be taking extra initiative to make sure stuff works. That's pretty cool.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
That brings us to this week's What's That Sound? Last week was a sound contest, and this was another one that I'm afraid was too easy. Did you get to listen to the sound at all?
Oh, no, I haven't listened to that one yet.
Do you want to?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, sure.
What is it?
Like it was yesterday. Somebody's dang 2G, 3G phone interrupting your conference call.
Exactly. Played this last week. It actually stumped Tom Nardi. And when I said it, he was like, oh no. Yeah, that's so familiar. And I love yours because you said that it was interrupting your conference call.
Or predicting the phone to ring.
Yeah.
You know, the phone, yeah, like you knew it was going to ring.
Exactly. Yeah, and if you read through everybody's answers here, everybody has their own specific, you know, stories to tell about the GSM speaker thing. Everybody's like, you know, it's the sound of a cell phone being kept next to low-grade computer speakers. Or it's the sound that you're about to get an SMS message. Or it's the sound that, you know, I love it because it's really, really sweet that everybody had their own, like, little story to tell here. On the other hand, I can't read them all to you because we got 104 submissions for this one.
Wow.
And all of them were right. We
Wow.
got 104 submissions, absolutely 0 wrong answers. So kudos to everyone. I thought it was a little trickier than that, but I also thought it was pretty easy. Next week, I'm going to have to do something devilishly hard so that those hardcore What's That Sound people out there have a better chance of winning a t-shirt. But this week, all 104 of you are in, so congratulations. Here goes. I'm going to use a script that takes a picture of me with my webcam, hashes the image, and then takes the last 6 digits of that modulo 104, which is how many correct answers we got, and spits out a number. And taking the picture now, waving, that number is 25, which means the winner is... Congratulations to Jen Shaw. I'll be writing you an email. We'll get a shirt size from you and get that sent out to you shortly. Interference noise on a speaker caused by a nearby mobile phone receiving a call. See? There's one of those answers. Thanks you everybody for sending in your answers. I'll try to make next week's significantly more devilish. So listen in and try your luck next week. All right, let's start up the hacks this week. I'd like to start off with Zane Chua's Build a TPM module for your server. TPMs, or Trusted Platform Modules, have been in the news lately because they've been recently required by Microsoft's Windows 11 operating system, and a lot of people with older motherboards, or server motherboards in this case, don't have them installed yet. These are little special purpose microcontrollers that have both a lot of encryption stuff in their hardware and then can also store encryption keys inside their flash RAM and feed it back to the system. The idea is that the system can store all of its essential secrets inside this little hardware flash chip on the microcontroller there. That way, none of it will be stored on the hard drive. So if hackers take over your hard drive, they've got no hope of decoding it, for instance, of finding out your secrets. In particular, Microsoft is using it for BitLocker, which is a full disk encryption system. You know, you can't store the keys to decrypt the hard drive on the hard drive that you're encrypting, right? So they have to be somewhere else. So the solution is to store the BitLocker keys on this TPM chip. But then what do you do if you have a system without a TPM chip? Well, you can go out and buy them, and they come on little modules, and they sell for something like $50 to $100, which is kind of steep when you look at what Zane has done here, and that is buy a TPM chip raw for like a couple dollars and build a breakout board for it with a few capacitors, a couple resistors, and that's it, a header to plug in. In all, it's like a $5 worth of parts maybe, and that saves him from having to pay, $50 or $100 for one of these professionally made ones. And of course, it's just as secure. At least I hope it's just as secure, and I hope he bought the chip through a reputable supplier. You never know. But I actually had to start looking into TPM chips and the whole TPM system because I'd never really thought hard about it before. And what I don't understand about the security guarantee here is that it looks like this chip you ask it for the encryption key, or rather the BIOS asks the chip for the encryption key when it's starting up, and the chip gives it the key, and then the operating system can use that to decrypt the hard drive. I guess that's a security feature. I don't understand how, if you can just get the secret key out of the thing by asking the thing for the secret key, how that helps you. But I guess it does stop someone who's stolen your encrypted hard drive from being able to use it, or from just taking it and putting it in a different computer and gaining access to it. So I guess at least they're good for that. And the newer motherboards where the TPM is soldered onto the motherboard, at least to replace it, you'd have to, desolder it and stuff like that. So if anyone out there knows more about the TPM security guarantees than I do, I'd love to be pointed to a good link for it. I'll share my links that I found when I was digging into it in the show notes. But if you've got some really good ones that dig into the actual security guarantees of this thing, I'd love to see them. Do you have any computers that run Windows?
Yeah, not 11 yet, though.
Yeah, my wife had to buy a new computer because her old chipset wasn't supported by Windows 11.
Oh, dear. Yeah, mine probably isn't. I got it, that'll be 2 years this summer.
I think that's right on the edge. You'll have to check. I know Mike was talking about his, and he's like, I just bought this computer 2 years ago, and it won't run Windows 11, so...
It won't run this truck simulator I want to play, I know that.
Oh, no!
It's called My Truck Game.
Is that an operating system thing or a computer age thing?
Computer age, I think it needs an i7, I only have an i5.
Aw.
It needs like 4 gigahertz processor, I have 3.2.
Man, no truck simulator for you.
Nope.
What kind of trucks are these?
Big rigs.
Cool.
The physics of how the bumpiness, and you like load them up with rocks and take it to point B, and it's all bumpy, and yeah.
Oh, awesome.
My first hack this week is 3D printing a guitar neck by Jan Schoen. Now, my immediate thought is this is going to be difficult because guitar necks have a lot of tension in them, but this is meant to have a truss rod, so that makes me feel a lot better about it. So Jan started with a Fender Strat style kit and built the whole thing, and then from there decided to print the neck. And he printed it on a wall-mounted belt printer. And there's a brief interlude in the video with a montage of him mounting the thing. It does sound pretty good, if a little buzzy. He says the neck is flexible, which I can imagine it would be. It does make an interesting addition to the sound, I think. And he's going to 3D print the rest of the guitar, and hopefully we can do a follow-up.
Can you actually hear the difference, or does he just dive bomb with it? Is he just like bending it around to change the pitch, or? He
is a little. I mean, he goes pretty hard on it with some metal, and but toward the end he moves the neck back and forth, and you can hear it bend.
That's
the pitch.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's funny. As I can hear all the guitarists out there screaming something about tone wood right now.
Hell yeah.
Is green the right tone PLA? Should you be using... Does a guitar with the neck printed in PETG sound different, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I can't wait to see what he uses for the soundboard.
Because he's going to swap that all out too eventually.
Yeah. Well, I guess it matters less on an electric, but...
I just got skipped in the video to the part where he's rocking out on it now. That's fantastic.
Spit out of tune. Doesn't care for metal.
What else would you do if you had an infinite 3D printer, right? You can print something that's long and thin and boom, guitar neck.
I don't know what I would go with.
No?
I have to think about that.
I think not guitar neck for me.
Maybe a really long recorder? Oh, one of those Alpine horns like in the Ricola commercial.
Oh, yeah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because there it's not even particularly under stress, and you just press go on the printer, and then a week later you have a 6-foot-long Alp horn.
Excellent. One of the 2018 prize entries, going back a few years, was a completely 3D printed guitar. It has a hexaphonic pickup, landlights in the fretboard, and it talks to a computer for pure data processing.
That's a cyber guitar.
Totally.
It's a 3D printed cyber guitar.
So this hexaphonic pickup has 6 outputs for each string, is sent into a teensy with an audio path for each string. And the processing happens inside the guitar with a latency of under 5 milliseconds. So that's not too bad.
I'm just now looking at this. I love the LEDs in all of the fret positions.
Yeah.
So you can have it light up and it looks like you're playing Guitar Hero, but on the fretboard or something.
We've seen 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 guitars that use LEDs in the fretboard for teaching. Maybe I should like those too.
Oh, look at that. It's no surprise that this was a semi-finalist in the musical instruments category that year. Well, good. I was like looking through this. I'm like, wow, this is really awesome. I hope this one won something. And yeah, it did. Good job.
Other link, sometimes, so this person learned the hard way about buying replacement parts. They bought vintage tuners for the headstock, but the holes are too big. So they printed an adapter to make the hole smaller. And it hides under the tuner, so nobody has to know. Better than Bondo or something.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Fill them with epoxy, drill again. No, a 3D printer. Oh, I'm telling you, that's going to slowly creep over time as the plastic smooshes. That's not going to work.
It'd be fun to follow up. It's been almost 2 years on that one.
Yeah, oh, we should call them up. We need to make people submit their phone numbers so that we can... Anyone whose project gets featured on Hackaday has to give us their phone number so we can call them up.
It has to be valid. None of this 867-5309.
We're not falling for that. My next hack is from Anders Nielsen, and he has built himself a 6502-based kind of demo computer, all from chips. And so, what you should have in mind is something kind of the size of a sandwich, or maybe two sandwiches laid next to each other or something, full of old school integrated circuits, right? The problem with these kind of retro computers is that the ROM that they boot up with is often an EEPROM. And these are super old school UV erasable, programmable, read-only memory chips. And that's what we would have had in a computer like this back in the day. But man, pulling out these ROM chips, clearing them, reflashing them is a horrible way to get your ROM running on the thing if you're busy debugging the ROM. And so there has to be a better way. And that's what this project is about. Wireless bootloader saves you from swapping ROM chips. And what he does here is actually really clever. He writes a little bootloader that fits on one of these horrible EEPROMs, but he only has to flash it one time, because when he turns the thing on, what this bootloader does is knows how to talk to one of those NRF24 radio modules, and it then gets the new operating system over the radio and loads it into RAM and then runs it. And so this is a really clever way for him to very quickly update his, archaic retro computer while he's busy writing kind of the operating system for it, so that he doesn't have to always be flashing it into EEPROM. Instead, he said it takes about a second to load everything across. And the NRF24s, they're not super good for range, and they're not blazingly fast, but they use a lot less power than something like an ESP8266 that uses Wi-Fi, because they don't have a lot of the radio overhead, basically. And so Anders' system here can still run on a battery and still be, can have its operating system updated over the air really quickly. And I think that's really sweet. And the other thing that was great about his video and write-up is that he's kind of talking about what he's going to do next with this machine and whether it's allowed or legal or whatever to throw newer technology into an old retro computer like this. Like, if you're trying to make a 1970s style computer, is it at all fair to throw in this fancy radio and bootloader, from the future? And I thought he had some really nice philosophical take on where you draw the lines for convenience and, kind of retro computer realisticness and stuff. And he's thinking about doing a tape drive for this thing next and debating whether he's going to use an old reel-to-reel tape machine, which kind of would have been what you would have done in the mid-70s, or whether he's just going to give up and go to a cassette tape, or whether he's going to do something else. And I think that's fun, and it's one of these problems that a lot of people making retro computers must have.
Yeah, that is a good question. Where do you draw the line? Of course, you could just go with your personal preference and say screw it to any observers, but can see a lot of people getting angry if it's not completely vintage parts, like
Yeah, right?
dropping a in-dash changer in a Model A or just, But yeah, if it's something that helps you out while you're building it, and if you could remove it on your way out,
Right.
that's
Yeah,
kind of a tall order, but
I think he can actually in this instance. When he's done developing his OS, he can just flash that into the EEPROM, overwrite the bootloader, and then plug that in. So yeah. You could think of this as being just like a development convenience tool that he can eventually get rid of and throw the EEPROM in.
like hiding your ISP pins somewhere,
Right.
like nobody has to see those.
Yeah, exactly. I think how you draw these lines is really interesting, and it gives people a lot of room both to put their own spin on their own personal version of the computer they make, but also to just play around with what the architecture should be, what the architecture could have been, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's loads of fun. Gives each one its own unique flair.
Well, yeah, I mean, on the other hand, you could say that to pay homage is boring. To cover a song and do it exactly the same way as the original is boring, or maybe even pointless.
Yeah, I'm with you.
My next hack for this week is FreeDMO gets rid of Dymo Label Printer DRM. Now, this isn't one of those little label makers with a keyboard. This is a little thermal printer that does big labels and stickers. And the answer is in the blue pill board and just a couple of resistors. What FreePDK was able to do is intercept the RFID reader portion of the printer and use the blue pill as an I2C peripheral or controller. So this way it forwards the data and modifies it so the printer doesn't complain. When I was looking up this label printer to make sure that I knew what he was talking about, and it wasn't one of the kinds with the keyboard, I came across a Reddit post from about 5 months ago talking about the same printer, and they just took an empty core and stole the RFID tag off of it, tacked it up in place inside the machine. There's space to do that. As long as you use the same type of roll,
All right.
that'll work. Each type of roll you have, just collect the RFID tags.
And just kind of glue them in there, and then it thinks it always has a legitimate role. Oh, that's cute. But not quite as fancy as this one, where you're actually like writing the effectively RFID tag yourself on your blue pill board. Get hacker points for that. Yeah, this would be a great hack to enter into the Hackaday prize when we get to the section where it's about keeping devices out of the e-waste stream by hacking them to continue working with whatever paper source or whatever else you've got on hand. So
Arsenius linked a number of DRM circumventing hacks that we've seen over the years.
So if you're interested in that sort of thing, you should definitely go give this one a look and check them out.
Definitely.
My next hack actually comes from a Hackaday alum, Nava Whiteford. How did Dolby Digital sounds work on film? This is an interesting exploration into how audio was encoded on, old school movie film back when it was on actual film stock. And it's neat. I didn't realize that there were kind of toward the end of film's useful life in theaters, there were actually 4 different ways that sound was encoded on film. One of the ways, of course, is the super old school analog soundtracks where they have basically like 2 white strips, and the width of the white strip, it reflects the sound wave itself. And so when it's wider, it pushes the speaker out further, and when it's thinner, it pulls the speaker back, and it's just like a phonograph record or something. And then the next layer on top of this is a time code, and there used to be kind of synchronized digital time code. You could play the audio tracks on a separate sound player, and then it would sync up automatically with this time code that's running along on the film. And then there's kind of 2 more modern systems that came along, And that's the Sony one, which is called SDDS, which stands for Sony something digital sound, and Dolby Digital. And this one's talking about Dolby Digital, which is kind of visually, at least, printed on the film, the most interesting looking of those. And so Nava digs into an old patent, and it turns out that this thing looks a little bit like a QR code, and the data's encoded there with a Reed-Solomon error correcting code because, it's dots on film stock. So it could be read with errors in it, and you want to be a little bit careful about that. But it can't be encoded as error resiliently as something like a QR code is. But that's what these things end up basically looking like. It's got a little Dolby Digital symbol in the middle to use as a fiducial registering type thing, and then it's got set patterns in the corners, and the rest of it is just this 78 by 78 matrix of dots. 4 of these on every frame would then encode the digital audio that was going along with film. And I just thought this was really interesting, I guess because there were so many different kinds of technologies in use all at once. Like there were old school cinemas that actually played it in stereo, like with the needles on the analog one. And then there were still cinemas that were doing time code and had the audio, on like an 8-track player or who knows what alongside the film projection. It's just really interesting to think how at the end of kind of the film era, all of these different technologies were all existing side by side because, legacy movie theaters or something.
I thought I was picturing a 16 RPM record, one of the giant ones.
I saw a movie, some early experimental cinema coming out of like the 1930s, where this analog track, where it's basically just patterns of white and black that make the audio quite directly. There was a kind of a weird artistic experimental movement in the 30s, mostly out of Russia. Arseny Avramov did some movies where he like hand inked the soundtrack himself and just like drew light and dark spots, and they made sound as the film went over it.
That's cool.
Yeah. Another Russian, actually, Nikolai Voynov, did it with paper. He actually like glued opaque pieces of paper to the film stock and ran it through, which is even crazier. I've seen some of Avramov's films at a museum exhibit, a decade ago. It's really interesting. I'll throw some links in the show notes to this stuff. What I think is funny about this is that the technology to encode audio in movies, like the first talkies, the first movies with sound, were like the mid-20s, maybe even late 20s. And this is already like 1930, just a few years after sound was even thrown into movie stock, into the film stock, that people were already like hacking it. They were already like, I'm just going to draw my own sound and see what it sounds like. And I think that's really cool. It's kind of an interesting and weird technological leap there, I guess, because, here was this new talking, new movies with sound technology, and a whole bunch of people were just like, ooh, let's play around with that. And it actually gave birth to some early interesting kind of optical proto-synthesizers, actually, putting blocks of dark and light on film stock and running it through. So it's kind of a weird, I hesitate to say alternative universe early synthesizer version, because it was actually happened in our universe. But I do think it's just absolutely insane that all of these developments happened kind of a few years after films had sound at all.
I don't know if it's that weird.
No?
A new thing comes out and people still go crazy over it.
True. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it isn't so weird. That kind of fundamental, hey, here's a new technology, let's see what we can do with it, is maybe human universal rather than crazy or weird. This may be the rule rather than the exception.
All right, for my last hack, I've got TSH Watch helps you learn more about yourself. This one is by Ivan/@Pico. And here we have Biometrics Bereft of Big Brother. It may look like a smartwatch, and it is a smartwatch, It may look like a fitness tracker, but the point of this device is to better understand your body's state. Are you stressed and sweating about it? Are you too sedentary and you need to move around? Well, this is the device for you. Ivan / Pico spent 2 years designing this, and he's still working on it and is welcoming people to join the effort. So this thing has it all. It monitors heart rate, it has a contactless skin temperature, galvanic response reader, it has a pedometer, it has a combination air quality, temperature, humidity, pressure sensor in it.
Oh my god.
The most impressive part is probably that Ivan conquered the ESP32's ULP, ultra low power, and wrote ULP drivers for all of these sensors, and is already at 36 plus hours on a single charge. Ooh. Although he's trying for a week.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I think it looks fantastic. He's started, with a breadboard, obviously, and went through OLED screen, and now is on an e-ink, and I think the e-ink looks great.
Yeah, it looks awesome, and it must be lower power too.
So this one's up over on IO. If you want to join the effort, let them know.
This week, I'd like to start off my quick hacks with a 3D printing feat. This is a 3D printed 35mm movie camera by Yuta Ikea. This is a really cool looking 3D printed device. It's actually got an electric motor in it that's driven by an Arduino, but then a mechanical shutter that's all 3D printed connected to that does the exposing. Instead of using up the full frame of the film, it uses half the frame. So you get these really neat looking super wide images. It's got custom cartridges that he has to reload with film himself, and then he can take it out. It's really neat because it's a complete design of a movie camera. I just wish there were more detail about it. So Yuta, if you're out there listening to us, write up more. I want to see more of the modeling and more of how it works. It's a lovely, lovely hack. Next up, a simple linear power supply done well by Electro Boy. This is a really classic DC power supply design, and this is kind of the super low-tech version. It's basically just a transformer that feeds into a rectifier, which gives you kind of wiggly DC, and then enough capacitors to squash the wiggles down. It has no active components in it, and it basically leans really heavy on having some giant capacitors and a decent transformer upstream. These are super useful for audio applications because they can have even less noise than a linear regulator power supply. So I presume that's why Electro Boy is building this one, but it's just kind of your reminder that you don't have to have a regulated power supply to have a stable DC voltage source, if that's something you're into. And last up, turn timing diagrams into ASCII art for friendlier pasting. This is a software project by Luke Wren called ASCII Wave, and it takes the existing graphical wave timing diagram generator Wavedrum, which I've used. I actually really love it. And it turns these pretty graphics into ASCII timing diagrams, which are then suitable for cutting and pasting into your source code. So if you're doing anything with like a microcontroller or an FPGA where you want to convey to the people reading your source code when things should be happening relative to each other, now you've got a way to put that in the comments and not just have it as a picture that's alongside everything.
For my quick hacks this week, first up is W&M Levsha's fancy wire loop game is a beauty in brass. That is an understatement. These wire loop games, which are meant to test your sobriety, let's say, or your steady hand. They're usually made from coat hanger wire or something else, but this one is machined brass, and it's beautiful. And of course, the wand that you use to run around the course is beautiful as well, and even has a knurled handle. Next up is Cranktown Cities. Windshield wipers rock to the beat. This isn't the first time we've seen windshield wipers rocking to the beat. It is different. It's more invasive than the first one we saw. Basically, he's using an Arduino to read the signal from the wiper stock to know what mode they're in, and uses a controller to drive them. It uses a spectrum analyzer to track the bass of the music to determine the beat. And how this differs from Ian Charness's version we saw back a while back. Ian showed up in the comments actually and says there's no need to drill out the motor casing and install an encoder because the wiper motors already have a park switch. So his method uses a PLL scheme to synchronize the wipers to the beat without any modifications to the wiper motor itself. Either way, it's a cool idea and I dig it. For my third quick hack, KMatch 98's quick swap socket for Stemma QT experiments. This is what it says on the tin. It's a Stemma QT socket that is essentially a JST connector between two pieces of printed plastic. But it makes life a whole lot easier because you can save your fingernails trying to remove JST plugs. You don't have to mess them up trying to use needle nose pliers. I think it's just a great little quick hack.
Quick hacks.
All right, well, that brings us to our Can't Miss articles. This is original content written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week I picked Arsenius Pichugin's Hacker Dictionary RS-485 Will Go the Distance. The reason I picked this is because RS-485 is a really neat kind of alternative or, level up to the regular old serial communication that we all know and love from one device to another. This is also an asynchronous, you have to know the baud rate kind of high-low thing. Instead of regular old serial where you have one data line, here you have a differential pair of data lines, and that gives you a certain robustness to noise coming in from the environment and lets you get away with just using a regular old pair of wires or maybe a twisted pair if you're feeling fancy. RS-485 is a very widely used industrial standard, so you can just buy chips that do a lot of the hard work for you. But then there's all of the devils in the details, and that's what I thought was really great about this article, is that in principle anyway, you can just buy a couple RS-485 transceivers, put a wire between them, and then just hang all your other devices off of them, and they can all talk to each other. Except there's all of these details that you then need to worry about. And he covers most of them here, including like how you bias the lines so that when none of the devices are talking, they don't just float randomly up to random voltages in the air, whether you do need a ground line, when you can get away without it, when you shouldn't use one. And then there's kind of this whole other layer to this that there isn't to regular UART serial, where you just have one device talking to another. Here you've got a bus, so you can have a whole bunch of devices sharing the same lines if you like daisy chain them all together. That adds an extra level of complexity because then you need a kind of a protocol to deal with this. Between Arsenius's post and the comments here, which point to a few brilliant app notes, you should be able to get yourself started with RS-485 communications. And what that means practically is you buy a couple cheap modules on eBay, you run a couple wires between them, and you start sending signals with microcontrollers across them, and you see what happens, and you can start playing with it. The point is that this is a great kind of simple, low-level bus idea that's pretty noise immune, and so it's used in a lot of industrial controllers and, things where things have to work and they have to work right, all connected to the same line. And that makes it something that is also good for hackers. We actually set up an RS-485 network thing, and we had this kind of unwritten rule that anyone could patch any device into it they wanted to, as long as they documented it well. And that was kind of fun, but a little bit chaotic, as you'd imagine. But I actually put a light sensor onto the thing, and it was connected up at the end. It was connected up to a computer that was kind of the central server that we had there, and it would read the data coming across. And it was awesome fun because to connect this little light sensor unit up to it, I really literally went up to this cable, and we were using, an Ethernet cable just because it was cheap wire, right? And I literally cut it in half and then soldered, this pair onto one side of my device and this pair onto the other, and boom, it was on the network. And that was like the first time I'd ever played around with this kind of thing before. And that was actually, I don't know, it just seemed so kind of basic and crude, but really awesome and enabling all at the same time to me. And so I do have a love for RS-485, even though I will admit I don't have anything running it in my house right now. Everything's wireless. Boo, maybe I should run some wires for old time's sake.
I think you should. For my Can't Miss article, I chose Dan Maloney's Confessions of a Crimpaholic. Dan was installing a battery management system on a battery for a solar project when he needed a certain tool. And lo and behold, he actually had it, and it was one of those cases where he didn't remember buying it. I think we've all had those situations. Serendipitous situations. But the family picture that he's got there includes the only crimper I have that I can think of right now offhand, which is that classically bad multi-tool that also strips and cuts bolts and cuts wires.
Yeah.
And does none of these things well. These days, Dan has fallen in love with ratchet-style crimpers because it's hard to over-crimp things. And if you read, as he links to Maya's article about crimping tools and the cost of being cheap, crimping always takes me back to the required reading of Shelley Green's Super Conference talk from 2019, which is all about crimped connections. And you will, if you know nothing about crimped connections, you will feel like a boss after you watch this talk. Because I know I did.
I was actually sitting there in the audience for that one and watched it start, and I was like, this is not very interesting. This is kind of superficial. And she just keeps building and deepening. And then there's physics. And then there's all of this engineering knowledge that she has. And it just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And by the end, it's just astounding the depth of knowledge that people who do this professionally have. And then it's like theory doesn't work for this sort of thing. You have to actually go practice and build the thing and test it out and, cut it in half and see if the joint's good and stuff like that. I just thought it was a really neat kind of industry insider take on something that I totally take for granted.
We think we can get off the ground on paper, but we really need to try it to be sure.
Yeah, for sure, right? I'm definitely a tool buyer, but I'm also a cheapskate. So I'm kind of a reluctant tool buyer. I actually bought a set, and that was the coolest thing ever, was to buy a crimper and a set of these parts that it's meant to crimp, and they all go together, like exactly together, and it just works every time. And that is a fantastic feeling. This is kind of the shallow end of the pool for this sort of thing. It's not an expensive device, and it's not an expensive set of ferrules or anything, and it doesn't do anything fancy. It just makes it so that when I plug a light in here, it's legal and it won't void our insurance, right? Like, I'm doing the bare minimum, but it's just so nice to have a box with a bunch of exactly the right parts and exactly the right crimper to go with it. So I see what happened to Dan here. I'm looking at this picture and I can totally imagine that happening to me if I weren't such a cheap bastard, or if I did a lot more, kind of home DIY stuff like he does. Oh, and he gets some of those from doing radio stuff. He's doing some ham radio stuff that he needs those for.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's done a solar installation, so he needs special ones for that. He's done some radio stuff, so he needs special ones for that. I don't think he has a problem. I think he has the right tool for the job.
He's even got the serious business ones. What are they called again? Anderson Power Pole.
Yeah. Other people in the comments are like, they have 15 crimpers too. So it's not the only one.
I have too many of a lot of things.
Yeah, what tools do you have too many of?
Well, pens for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Types of scissors, probably.
Right? But they all do different jobs?
They do.
Yeah.
Cutting implements. Let's broaden it out to cutting implements to include, the razor sharp pizza cutter, rotary cutter.
Mm-hmm. Those are good when you need them.
Yeah, that's true.
I actually finally broke down and bought one of those for cutting carbon fiber mat for doing, model airplane stuff, but whatever. But if you try to cut carbon fiber stuff with scissors, it just it doesn't like to cut through them, and the fibers just go everywhere. They get all taken out of their weave. Whereas if you do it with one of these rolly cutters, like the pizza cutter thing, it just goes schnick right through it and boom, you're done. It's absolutely beautiful. So I see it.
Be careful, it'll go right through your skin too.
Really? Mm-hmm. They seem so harmless.
Oh, do you have one with the dead man handle? I wish I had one of those.
It's got a spring-loaded something on it that prevents you from... It's not a simple pizza cutter. It's got a spring guard.
Yeah, mine you can just leave open.
Oh.
In danger mode.
All right. What's the weirdest scissor you have?
Weirdest. I'm not sure. I've got maybe those anodized rainbow thread snips that I was trying to magnetize to stick to my industrial machine.
Okay.
Because they're very, very lightweight, thin metal. They're just kind of interesting, but they're real sharp and they do the job.
Rainbow anodized for fun, or?
That's just
or does it keep them sharp?
I'm not sure. Rainbow sharp.
Rainbow sharp.
I'll take a picture of them. I do have them magneted to the machine, but the magnet doesn't stick to either the machine or the scissors, so they trade. The magnet trades places.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, when I was a kid, my mom had those. I don't know what they're for. It's some kind of fabric scissor that makes a zigzag cut.
Oh yeah, pinking shears.
See? Exactly. Pinking shears. And I used to think they were awesome, and she used to yell at me because apparently I was dulling them by cutting all the paper around the house out of them.
Oh, yeah, and you can't really sharpen them because
they have these crocodile teeth, and you just can't do it. Yeah.
I always wondered if you could tell if you cut hair with them, if it would zigzag the hair, or if you couldn't tell. I don't think you could tell.
Oh, awesome. Oh, we have to try it.
Okay.
Not on me.
I'll get a doll or something.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or a long-haired cat.
That about does it for this week's Hackaday podcast. If you have anything you'd like to say to us, reach out, editor@hackaday.com. If you see anything cool or do anything cool, send us a tip, tips@hackaday.com. As always, you'll find links in the show notes, hackaday.com/podcast. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
What's a mic hat? Da-da-da. How am I going to start this?
I don't know. That's terrible.
I'm losing my mind.
What's that sound? It's the sound of Elliot losing his mind.
Okay, here we go. One more time. Boo me.
I could just cry about the Pebble project ending.
All right, good. Here we go.
Wick hacks.